Advent is, of course, a time for preparing for Christmas. We all know that, the coming of Christ. But the early part of Advent really puts a lot more emphasis on the second coming of Christ at the end of time for the final judgment that will usher in a new creation of heaven and earth, one without the effects of sin and suffering that we experience now. And so it is that we see in the gospel of Christ healing the two blind men a fulfillment, the beginning of the fulfillment of that new creation, a fulfillment of the prophecy given in the first reading today. The prophet Isaiah depicts a typical Old Testament prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, of messianic times, when many of the physical difficulties that we experience in the world will be ended and corrected, that the barren trees will bloom, that orchards will become like forests, that the blind will see, as we see Jesus do in the gospel, that the deaf will hear. But it's easy to overlook the other parts of messianic times that the prophet talks about in that first reading today, what we might call a new creation from the point of view of what is moral, of goodness, the conversion of hearts and souls as well. So he talks about that tyrants and oppressors will be put to an end, and that those who err will understand what they have done wrong, and those who criticize and complain will receive teaching, instruction, catechesis in the full reality of who God is and how God works and how he is bringing his will to be in the world. That we also see in the gospel in a subtle way. It says that after the blind men have been physically cured, it says they go forth and proclaim what God has done for them in Christ. They are beginning that process, you might say, of instructing those who need to know that Christ is near. The same challenge exists for us. We who are redeemed by Christ, but still awaiting for the fulfillment of that on the last day. We have a role to play. Recently, the Universal Church went through a process of a synod on the local level, and there were many, many forms of listening sessions throughout the world. Here in our diocese, one of the very, very top concerns was people expressed, the lay people of the parish expressed a need for greater adult instruction so that they could not only know their faith and not only defend their faith, but also proclaim their faith, to do what the blind men did, to begin to exercise that role of being disciples who are also givers of witness to the faith. This is part of the messianic promise that the Old Testament foresaw, that Christ begins to fulfill, and that we are called to by virtue of our baptism. It is a proper subject for our Advent meditations, above and beyond preparing for remembering the historical coming of Christ, to realize that we have a role to play here and now in making Christ more real in our own world, so that when he comes, that we can say with the responsorial psalm today, that the Lord is my light and my salvation, that I long to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and that because we shall see the bounty of the Lord, that we wait for the Lord with courage, the courage to proclaim who he is and what he has done for us.